What if everything you believe about growing your own food is built on a quiet, profitable lie? Not a conspiracy, not a fringe theory. A slow, deliberate erasure of a plant that fed entire civilizations for thousands of years. A plant that produces food year-round. A plant whose fruit stores without refrigeration for up to 6 months. A plant that, once placed in the ground, never asks you to plant it again. You grew up watching someone in your household wrestle with tomatoes. The cages, the stakes, the watering schedules, the seedlings that had to be started indoors in February so they would be ready by May. And every fall, the same ending. The plants die, the garden goes cold and empty, and the grocery store becomes the only option until warmth comes back around. That was the only story you were ever offered. There is another one. It begins in the Andes Mountains of South America, a terrain so extreme, so cold and wind-battered that only the most resilient food plants could survive. The indigenous peoples of Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia and Chile did not plant and replant. They did not build infrastructure every spring and tear it down every autumn. They planted once. They tended a tree, and that tree gave back for 2 full decades. The plant is the tamarillo, known in the Quechua language of the Inca Empire as chiltu. For thousands of years before a single European ship reached Andean shores, it was not a seasonal luxury, not a summer crop. It was a permanent fixture of productive mountain gardens, a food source that survived altitude, cold snaps, and the kind of harsh conditions that would end an annual garden in a single night. When Spanish explorers reached South America in the 16th century, they found it everywhere. On terraced hillsides, in village gardens, at the borders of forests, a tree no taller than a large shrub, carrying clusters of egg-shaped fruit that tasted richly of tomato, but behaved like nothing they had ever seen. Seeds went back to Europe. Reports followed, and then, as happened with so many powerful plants brought out of the New World, the knowledge arrived and quietly vanished. Here is what most gardening guides never tell you. A standard tomato plant, the one every nursery sells every spring, the one on which the entire backyard gardening industry depends, produces roughly 30 pounds of fruit in its entire life. Then it dies. You return the following spring. You buy new seeds or new transplants, you rebuild the cages, you amend the soil again, you start from zero every single year. The tamarillo does not work that way. One tamarillo tree planted once can produce fruit for 20 years. In that same period, it yields what researchers have documented, over 3,000 pounds of food from a single plant. That is not a rounding error. That is not an estimate based on ideal laboratory conditions. That is 100 times the lifetime yield of the annual tomato, for a fraction of the labor and none of the replanting cost. The plant that produces year-round, the plant that stores without refrigeration, the plant that never asks you to come back to the nursery. In mild climates, it does not even recognize winter as a stopping point. It produces in spring. It produces through summer. It produces deep into autumn. When your neighbor has already pulled their tomato stakes out of the ground and composted the plants, the tamarillo is still setting fruit and ripening clusters on its branches. Researchers at Massey University in New Zealand documented continuous fruiting cycles in established tamarillo trees through seasonal conditions that would collapse a conventional tomato crop within days. The tree does not follow the same clock. It built its internal rhythm over millions of years in the Andean highlands, where the only viable strategy was to keep producing no matter what the season said. And now here is the part that almost nobody discusses. The fruit is wrapped in a thick, bitter outer skin. Most people who encounter a tamarillo for the first time look at that skin and assume it is a flaw. Something to work around. It is not a flaw. It is one of the most elegant natural preservation systems in the entire plant world. That skin acts as a seal. It keeps oxygen, bacteria, and excess moisture away from the flesh in a way that the thin, fragile skin of a conventional tomato cannot. The result is a fruit that maintains itself at room temperature for weeks. At proper cool storage conditions around 40 degrees Fahrenheit, it holds for 4 to 8 weeks. Blanch the fruit for 30 seconds in boiling water, peel it, freeze the flesh, and it remains usable for up to 8 months. A ripe tomato goes soft in 4 to 7 days. The tamarillo waits. And what waits underneath that protective skin is nutritionally extraordinary. Researchers at Auckland University of Technology documented antioxidant activity in tamarillo that exceeds apples, oranges, red grapes, kiwi fruit, and pineapple. Every single one of those fruits, staples of every grocery store produce aisle on Earth, was outperformed by the fruit that your garden probably does not contain. A single serving delivers over 67% of your daily recommended vitamin C intake. It carries beta-carotene, vitamin E, vitamin B6, potassium, iron, and chlorogenic acid, a polyphenol with documented anti-inflammatory and metabolic properties in peer-reviewed research published in journals indexed by the National Institutes of Health. Research published in PMC confirmed that its anthocyanin and flavonoid content drives antioxidant capacity well above most commercially dominant fruits. This is not a garden novelty. This is a food system. The preparation takes 30 seconds. Drop a tamarillo into boiling water for half a minute. Lift it out, let it cool, and the bitter skin peels away cleanly under your fingers. What you find inside is dense, deeply flavored flesh, somewhere between a ripe tomato and a plum, that you can eat raw, cook into sauces and chutneys, blend into drinks, or reduce into a concentrate that stores for months on a shelf without a single preservative. Indigenous communities across the Andes have done exactly that for thousands of years. So why do you not know this plant? That question deserves a direct answer. The modern seed market runs entirely on annual crops. A plant that dies every season is a plant that generates a customer every season. Seeds, transplants, soil conditioners, pest sprays, support structures, all of it sold in the spring, all of it bought again the next spring. That cycle is worth billions of dollars per year. A perennial tree that feeds your family for 20 years is, from a commercial standpoint, a problem. You buy it once, you never come back. During the 1940s, when over 20 million victory gardens covered backyards, rooftops, and public parks across the United States, and when those gardens produced 42% of all domestic produce consumed that year, perennial food plants were valued precisely because they reduced dependence on rationed supplies. A plant that kept producing without being replanted was exactly what families under wartime food pressure needed. Then the war ended. Commercial food infrastructure rebuilt itself faster than anyone expected. The grocery store returned as the default. Annual crops dominated the seed catalogs because they created repeat customers. The nurseries stocked what sold in volume: annual tomatoes, annual peppers, annual squash, plants that guaranteed the gardener would be back again in 12 months. One generation. That is all it took to make the tamarillo invisible. Families moved from the land to the suburbs. Lawns replaced kitchen gardens. The nurseries stopped carrying unusual perennials that a customer might buy once and never need again. The tamarillo, which had no marketing lobby and required no replacement purchase, disappeared from the American garden conversation. It is still growing in New Zealand, where commercial cultivation has continued since the late 1800s. It is still growing across Colombia, Ecuador, and parts of East Africa. It feeds people on every continent where it is known. It just stopped being known here. You can grow it now. In USDA zones 8 through 11, it thrives outdoors through the full calendar year. In colder zones, it grows in large containers and moves undercover when temperatures threaten to drop below freezing. Mature trees can survive brief exposure to 28 degrees Fahrenheit, losing branches but not the core. The California Rare Fruit Growers Association documented successful fruiting trees in Northern California locations as far inland as Santa Rosa. It does not need a second plant for pollination. It is fully self-fertile. It bears fruit within 18 months of planting. It asks only for shelter from wind because its roots sit shallow and its fruit-laden branches are brittle and a consistent water source during establishment. After that, it largely tends itself. You plant it once. It feeds you for the rest of the decade and the decade after that. Here is the larger pattern worth recognizing because the tamarillo is not alone in this story. The plants that produce continuously, store without electricity, never demand replanting, and nourish families through every season are systematically absent from mainstream gardening culture, not because they are difficult, not because they are obscure, but because food security and commercial dependency are opposing forces. And for the past 80 years, the commercial dependency model has been the one that scaled, the one that got the catalogue space, the one that got taught in schools and shown on television. The plants that break that model have been left out of the conversation, not by accident, by design. The tamarillo is one of them, and now you know it exists. If this opens something for you, press like, drop your climate zone in the comments and subscribe. Because the next plant we uncover has been feeding mountain communities for 5,000 years, and it has never once appeared in a mainstream seed catalogue.